welcome everyone. We are here today for a FAIR workshop with SORSE. Please apologize, this is the first time that I'm chairing such kind of session, so please apologize any bump on the road. I would like to mention that today's program is FAIR4RS software. Reading just the names on the slide now, we have Dr. Anna-Lena, we have Fotis, we have Leyla around, Morane, Neil, Chue, Carlos, and I believe that is all, and I have not missed anyone. So the names include a few of the people that were present in the first session. Today is the second session, or at least the repetition. And I would like to mention as well that as with SORSE, we do have a code of conduct. So if you find any issue or if there's any problem, please do contact us, and please do follow this code of conduct. In addition, as you might have noticed, there is a tiny icon on the corner of the screen. So this session is actually being recorded. So if you'd like not to be filmed, please feel free to disable your camera or to stop your video. I would also like to mention the future SORSE events. So starting from the 25th of November, and today is the 19th and the FAIR software. So we'll have a few additional topics. You can also follow all of this in the SORSE GitHub page where you can find all the program. And if you would like to also suggest additional topics for the future or to sign up to the mailing list, you can also follow these links. I will provide, I cannot really access the chat now, but we will provide all of these links afterwards if you also, for your convenience. So with that, once again, I would like to remind that the session is being recorded, and I will now pass the session to the speakers.
Thank you, Renato. So I'm going to be your first speaker. I'm going to share my screen. Just a moment. Let me do that. Can you see my screen? Yes, I see some yeses on the other screen where I see you all. Oh, I'm very excited to be here. And so we prepared a very nice workshop for you. We already had a rehearsal on Tuesday with the first session, which was very early in the morning for me. And now we are looking at the sun setting behind me as we are having this second session. The name of this workshop is FAIR4RS software, because we are very engaged in this subject of FAIR principles and research software, and the people that prepare these sessions for you are all noted here on this slide. So I'm going to thank them one by one, even if they are not here. Thank you, Paula, Anna-Lena, Carlos, Michelle, Dan, Leyla, Neil, Fotis, and Jennifer. On this slide, you can see the collaborative notes, tiny URL, but I see that somebody already did that in the chat. I'm Morane Gruenpeter. I am a software engineer and a metadata specialist at the INRIA Research Center on the software heritage team. And I will present the next few slides for you. And first, let's see what we have for this agenda, for our agenda today. We have a kind of a long workshop, 3 hours. I feel that's a long time, but it's enough time to discuss many things and go into the depth of some specific issues. We will start with the first hour, kind of scope the context and the goal of the workshop and introduce you to FAIR and FAIR software intro with a live activity. Then we'll have a short 15-minute break. After that, we will discuss and introduce the FAIR4RS Software Working Group, which is now working on definition of FAIR research software, a community definition. We'll do also an update of the 4 subgroups working on under this main working group, and have a Q&A. Then we'll have another break, and after this break, we'll have a nice, like more lively part where we will break out into groups and discuss specifically these 3 topics you can see on my slide, which are interoperability, reusability, and credit for making software fair. But we'll discuss that also later. So this is a rerun of the session on Tuesday, but we had some modification done because we had a feedback that we need some more context. Well, for the goals of this workshop, we will try to build skills to develop of principles and standards, drafting the set of FAIR principles relevant to research software. We'll try to understand the fundamental properties and reuse of research software, and as we see you all here today, we'll engage and build new collaboration with you and the community members. We can see how we consider RSC's critical role in advancing the FAIR4RS software agenda, because you have this role to be early adopters, champions, case study contributors, and in ways that support regional disciplinary RSC priorities. So to scope a little bit, to get the big picture, we've collected 2 examples, very dated, but interesting. The first one is a quote by Margaret Hamilton, saying, "When I first got into it, nobody knew what it was that we were doing. It was like the Wild West. Maybe by having some FAIR principles, it will one step forward into not being the Wild West." Here you see on the photograph standing next to Margaret Hamilton, the print of all the lines of source code of the Apollo 11 mission. Then another example is the World Wide Web, which was invented by Tim Berners-Lee while he was working at CERN as a research project on the next machine. And I also like that quote where saying that by being a program computer, you're joining a group of people who can do incredible things. They can make the computer do anything they can imagine. So let's see what we can imagine. To continue with some history here about software development and version control system, we see that developing software is not just an individual activity, it's a collaborative activity. And for that, version control systems are very important. In the 80s, it started with local VCS, with RCS. Then in the 90s, we had centralized version control systems with CVS, and then in 2000, Subversion. And lastly, but the most popular ones that we see now today are the distributed version control system with Git, Mercurial, and Bazaar. Now, I want to take a moment to tell you, as I'm working at the Software Heritage team, Software Heritage was launched in 2016 and tried to capture this, the complete history of the source code by really having all the version archived in the Software Heritage archive. I'm not sure how many of you do know Software Heritage. I invite you to go and check out our archive. Even if you know the project, it's very interesting to see that I'm taking that just a brief second to show you that you can search in this archive a URL for any Git repository that you have or other repository. We already have many things inside this archive, and you can also archive things that you don't own if they are public by doing a save code now of the code you want to save. So going back to here, sorry. Next step in our brief history recap is the research software engineer role. So I recently discovered that it was conceived in 2012, which is kind of late in the development of this community, and I was surprised. And now it's really it became very popular and very recognized internationally. So it took not so long to become such an important role in research and in software development. But that's one of the quotes we've gathered from the blog post by Simon Hetrick from the Software Sustainability Institute. A next step in this, and to say a little bit of context, is the question of reproducibility, because the FAIR guiding principles that were written in 2016 do talk about the goal of reproducibility. We want data to be fair because we want data to be reproducible. And yet the consensus on the terminology is not really there yet. We do have for example, the ACM badges that have 3 terms on their badge: repeatability, reproducibility, and replicability, which changed recently thanks to the National Information Standards Organization having a report that had it more precisely defined. So where we stand today when we say software and FAIR. As I said, 2016 we written the FAIR guiding principles. Since then, in the Turning FAIR into Reality report from the European Commission, we see that some tailoring should be done when it comes to software. So do software artifacts require different FAIR principles? We can say that even also in 2020, with the 6th recommendation for implementation of FAIR practice, there is a need to translate the FAIR principle that will support the software objects or the other digital objects. And lastly, the French National Committee for Open Sciences said that we need to make sure the specific nature of software is recognized and not considered as just data. So in that regard of open science and FAIR are really closely related. And research software is one of the pillars for open science, even though we are not sure how open or if what we mean when we say FAIR and open. So FAIR doesn't necessarily mean open, as it was stated in the FAIR guiding principles, but let's see what it means about software. Last but not least, no, it's not the last part. Now that we do see about resources that have written were written for specifically FAIR and software, we have from 2019, which is not long ago, the Towards FAIR Principles for Research Software, written by some of the people present here and that prepared for you this nice workshop. And in this publication, we have a translation of the FAIR principles to research software, which is very interesting and is taken into account in the community definition of FAIR for research software. Then we have the assessment report on fairness of software, which is a FAIR report analyzing different resources that call for better recognition of software in academia and introduce 10 high-level recommendations to what do we need for the FAIR principles to be. Then these recommendations are not about how do you make software fair, but how do you write FAIR principles for software. And lastly, we have the EOSC Scholarly Infrastructure for Research Software report, which is not yet published. We are waiting for the EU Commission publication, but that diagram here is from this report. which does mention FAIR, but is not analyzing FAIR. It's looking at the infrastructure in place that can enable FAIR and talk about 4 pillars: archive, reference, describe, and credit, that will help research software to be recognized in the scholarly ecosystem. So there are some other initiatives and outcomes that do talk about FAIR and software. It means that it's a real subject of interest at the moment, and we are working towards this community definition with the FAIR4RS Software Working Group, which is an initiative combined from the RDA Working Group, a FORCE11 Working Group, and a ReSA, Research Software Alliance task force. So we just started now in 2020. We launched the 4 subgroups in July, and we'll have some more information about that in our next hour. And with that, I'm going to pass the torch and the floor to Anna-Lena.
Yes, so I'm gonna take over your screen sharing as well.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, so next step is a bit of a deeper dive into what this FAIR for software discussion is actually about, and we're going to do that in an interactive way. So I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes.
And yeah, the first a couple of warm-up questions to get everyone really in place and a bit of ice-breaking sorts of behavior. So this is a Mentimeter slide deck that you can either join through like spare browser window or with your mobile phone. And all you have to do is to go to menti.com and enter this code that you see there, 3210858. And then it should take you to this page where you can answer the questions. And the first is just 3 easy ice-breaking questions for everyone to find this deck. And the very first questions: where are you joining us from today? So I expect a distribution from Europe and somehow America, Brazil, Ireland. Really nice. There must be really early morning for some of the people. Well, we are here, yeah, beyond sunset already in Central Europe. Canada, Paris. Several Dutch people around here. So we have 14 answers. Let's see if we get a couple more. Also some Germans around. Ireland. You. Okay. There was another one. Okay, so we have almost 20 replies. It's almost everybody, but you still will have the possibility to join for the next questions. But here we already see we have a nice global distribution of people. Hopefully that will also be interesting for the discussion. Second question is, what is the position or job title that you have in your email signature? So what are you officially? We're getting again a nice mix here, like really some software developers, but also community managers, team leaders, so that might also be in RSE, researchers, professors. Software engineer, metadata specialists, other like researchers, team leaders. Right, so like again, a really nice mix, and there was also contribute to an interesting discussion with many different perspectives. I'm happy to see that. Software development scientists, that also interesting. I mean, that would also apply to me, but I did not answer here. And a master's student, that's also good. Not only having the senior people, but also the younger ones is very, very useful usually. Okay, and third question in this series is, why did you choose to join this workshop? So why are you here? Why did you get up that early, or are you planning to stay up that late to be with us today? Curiosity, that's always very good. automated work in the working groups. That's also perfect. That will be the second part. Learning, someone interested in promoting software as part of the research process. Yeah, I think that's a general theme in the RSE community in the series anyway. And that's also relevant here. Exchange thoughts, connect with the community. To find out more. Well, someone started a PhD about open science and want to learn more about open software. Yeah, I think maybe after, in a break or something, I would like to hear more about that, I guess. More. Someone recently starting in an RSE and interested in international reach out. Institutional implementation is something that's mentioned here as well. Yeah. I mean, that's also something that's on the roadmap for my institution, and we see how we get there. Okay, thanks for this input. So we have a bit of an idea who is here in the room. Well, let's start to look a bit into the FAIR principles for software. So usually when people know FAIR principles, it's always like named as a FAIR data principles. And my first question to you is like, are you familiar with those? Would you say that? Some people yes, somewhat, someone no. Okay, you really learn a lot then today. So some people very confident, some a bit more careful, somewhat. That's fine. So we'll discuss them a bit on the go, but in a nutshell, really. So what these four letters F, A, I, and R mean is this often spelled out acronym: findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. A problem indeed is that often when you read the FAIR principles mentioned, that people leave it at spelling out this abbreviation and don't get a bit of don't really give extra explanations about them. But again, they're very short, and you're invited to read up on details afterwards. For example, at the Go FAIR page, you can say that findable is the principle that covers everything that says metadata and data should be easy to find. For people. Once a resource exists, then needs to be some easy way to find it, and typically that also means via search engines in the 21st century. So accessible then means that when we have these resources that are findable, users also need to know how they can be accessed. What are the rules, the access conditions, what are the protocols maybe to download resources, stuff like that. Interoperable for data means just addressing the needs for data to be integrated with other data, and also to interoperate with analysis code, because data itself, yeah, it does not do much today. There's always analysis code or software that needs to do anything with that. And finally, reusable is the principle that refers to everything about making these data and metadata, yeah, reusable by other people, but potentially also machines. And that boils down to being well described in all the dimensions that are required for people or machines to make good use of those resources. So that's a bit high level, but as a quick summary. So especially to those now who said they are familiar with the FAIR principles, but also for the somewhat people, here's a bit of a short quiz to check if you can place ideas about FAIR towards the right principle. So there's a statement or sub-principle that's called like metadata are assigned a globally unique and persistent identifier. And the question is, which FAIR principle is that? So people say findable. Are there any other opinions? One, two people more. Someone is putting something else, accessible. Right. Reusable. Yeah. I mean, of course, the principles are not, they are interconnected. So you cannot maybe say strictly that someone is not relevant at all for one of the other principles, but it is indeed true that this statement belongs to the findable principle, because it says this globally unique and persistent identifier is what makes a resource findable. It's like an address, and then you can find a person in real life. Okay, another statement. Let's see how this goes. So the metadata meet domain relevant community standards. Which one is that? We got a lot of variation in the answers here again. People still thinking a bit. So there seems to be a tendency that people say interoperable, but the mean thing about this principle is really a bit that that's not true. So this principle is actually the reusability. And I admit that it sounds very much like interoperability, of course, because it's about standards, and standards are usually for interoperability, but what is rather meant here, or the focus of this phrase statement, is more on domain relevant and community. So it involves everything that other, like peers from your community, would need to reuse your data. And so all the documentation, how it's going to be used and reused. So in fact, this is a statement that belongs to reusable. But you're in good company. So usually when I ask this question, people put this on interoperability, although in the FAIR principles list, it's not. But of course, they are closely interrelated. And you could probably make a case also to put it into the other category. But anyway, so two more of this kind. Retrievable by their identifier using a standardized communications protocol. So which would that be? Right, so we do have a clear tendency here, and accessible is indeed true in this case. Yeah? So the idea is that given an identifier, how do you get that that resource behind that? That is the accessibility question and the accessible principle. Yeah? Of course, like again, standards and communications have to do with interoperability as well, but this is about the accessible principle. Okay, one last one of this kind, qualified references to other data and metadata. Yeah, so you're very certain now that this is interoperability, maybe because this is the only one left that we didn't have now. It's indeed correct. And this is indeed interoperability, yeah. So this is really linking data sets to each other through references, and this is a clear interoperability case. And so finally we have that. Okay. So this was, again, very much about FAIR data. Now we're slowly moving into the direction about what's actually now the case about software, what this workshop is about. So Morane has already given a bit of introduction about FAIR. So the really first paper about FAIR is not so long ago, if you think about it. So it's this 2016 paper with the title, "The FAIR Guiding Principles for Scientific Data Management and Stewardship." which really kicked in. I don't know, they have several thousand citations meanwhile. And it was very quick that also funding agencies and even the European Commission have picked up those and are now demanding FAIR. And it's really cited everywhere. That's really amazing. But you can already see in the title there that, I mean, it says the principles for data management and stewardship. Although in that paper, the authors already mentioned that, yeah, the FAIR principles do not only apply to data, it's actually about all kinds of digital research objects that you could imagine. But this is not very much the way it was perceived and communicated. Then maybe one other milestone about how it was taken up was in 2018 when the European Commission for the first time really mentioned that in one of their central documents and say, okay, central to the realization of FAIR are these digital objects and which may represent data, software, workflows, and other kinds of digital resources. And there you see, luckily they kind of went a bit beyond the title of this original paper and mentioned the other kinds of resources as well. But then, because we know so much, or we as a scientific community know a lot about what FAIR means for data and how that should be done, but how do these FAIR principles actually relate to software? And it was also in 2018 that this discussion started in different places, and then people got together to have a bit of a closer look into that. And one big thing that we noticed was that there is a bit of a mismatch between the rather broad intentions of these four, what we then started to call foundational FAIR principles, so this F, A, I, and R, and the way these 15 FAIR guiding principles from the original paper were communicated and perceived, because the examples of the paper are very much tailored to data, and this was what has been taken up by the community, and it has been communicated and perceived for really not a long time, but it's a long time since the inception of FAIR, that this is for data. And now we are trying to catch up to see, okay, what does it actually mean for software, and how can we resolve this mismatch? And this is going to be our considerations for the rest of this small introduction session. Before we go there, we have a couple of questions to clarify terms, and I'm going to ask for your input again now. So when we talk about data, what is that actually? Data is everything. Yeah, very good. I just don't know if that's very helpful. Okay, but we do get here some information, observation, raw information, information in digital format. Is this life? Yeah, the plural of datum, yes. True, but I'm not sure if it's very helpful for the discussion. We'll get more. Let's see. So there's, yeah, so information is coming back with the additional qualification that it needs to be useful or usable information. Digital representation, observations from the real world, information, image values. Yeah, but we do have two big parts here, I think that's also relevant. So it's ones that we have some information or facts, something, and then the representation, which nowadays is usually in digital format. All right, facts and observations. Maybe let's leave it like at this for the moment. Because then the interesting question, if we now have a rough idea what is data, what is then software? We also have a nice and crisp definition for that term. We're using it all the time, but what is it actually? Digital methods, that's a nice definition. And next, instructions. Yeah, so instructions for a computer, often that's what we mean. Data generator. Yeah, interesting question if that's true for all kinds of software, but it could be. Again, instructions, algorithms, something new using a programming language. Yeah, instructions for a machine, computer code. Implementation of a functionality so that a computer can execute it. Yeah, so software can be data as well, some are saying. Yeah, we get back to that in a little while. Machine readable instructions, yes, programs which interpret and analyze information and data. Translation from data into other data, yeah. The data-centric view of software, but not necessarily wrong. And again, computer instructions with a specific aim. Yeah, very good. Yeah, we're gonna come back to some of those definitions later on. So getting a step further, so we have data and software. The question is now, what do data and software have in common? What will you say? There's maybe several things what you could say, but just put a few things that come to your mind. Digital, yes. I mean, for software, that probably has always been true, in the definition that we have, but for data, that's a newer thing in a sense. There are technical standards for both. Yeah, both can be a research output. That's especially in the source context important. Yeah. Creates more data. Source, yeah, that can be the source for something. Or documentation is needed, that's a good one too. Multiple versions, yes, although I would argue that maybe the versions are more important for software or more heavily used for software than they are for data. Both are science, yeah, that's also an important one. Both can be digital objects, we'll come back to that one in a while. Both must be described for sure, that's the same as like documentation is needed. And here also that relates to that, so we should have provenance and metadata for both of them. Prone to breaking, yes, also true for both, but maybe even worse for software. And software is often the best explanation for data results, yeah. Iterative accumulation, that certainly also happens for both, yes. Okay, so that was about commonalities. Yeah, software is a special type of data. Yeah, we'll get back to that one as well. There's a bit to discuss about that. Okay, so this was about commonalities, but what about differences? So what makes data and software different? So we have complexability, executability, or like static versus not static. Again, software is a special type of data. And again, we'll get back to that. Like an object versus a process, this is also static versus dynamic, actually. Software needs to be maintained. I mean, maybe data needs as well, but I agree that it's more complex for software. Copyright. Yeah, I mean, both would have copyright laws, but they are different. Yeah, data is passive. Software changes more frequently than data. Yes, I would agree with that. Written by humans versus generated. Well, meanwhile, that can be applied to both. You need software to process data, but not vice versa. It's also an interesting perspective. I agree with that. And people think data can be only right or wrong, whereas software is on a spectrum. software implements a process, data captures something and is more static. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these things, I mean, nothing about that is really wrong. Something is different perspectives on data and software, but all of these things in some regard need to be taken into account when we discuss what makes FAIR software principle important in addition to FAIR data principles. And the last point here that came in is software is executable, and that is what adds extra complexity compared to data, that's for sure. Okay, one last question, because before I take over the talking role or the presentation role again a bit. So if we look at software and code, how would you define or describe the relationship between those two? Or how would you differentiate those two terms? So first reply in this code makes software? Yes. Certainly the basis for software. Software is represented by the code. That's a pattern that comes often here. Our code is a form of software, and we can say we have it in raw form. Code are the instruction. Software is the thing that you interact with. There's software kind of the product that is defined by the code. Yeah. Oh, this is a really nice one. Almost poetic, like the human body compared to the sum of its cells. Yeah, so the living human body as a software, right? And the code. Software represents the use, code the approach to it. Right. Code is a materialization of the software. It also goes in that direction. Okay. Yeah, thanks for those inputs. I just, for the sake of time, I'm rushing a bit to the next part. So I want to promise to go back to this point about the relationship about software and data. And someone put this statement in the answers saying software is just a special type of data. Well, that's true in the sense if you look at it from a classical computer science perspective, because I mean that is what many people are taught in maybe basic computer science classes, especially when the environment is a bit more technical and engineering oriented, where we say, okay, we have in a computer actually at the end of the day everything is data in the sense of being sequences of ones and zeros in the memory, and everything then what happens to the computer is represented as sequences as ones and zeros and this kind of data. So we would have their information, but also instructions, and there was software would be just a special kind of data. So this is a very classical computer science view on things, and it's not necessarily wrong, but we did not find it very helpful for the discussion of FAIR and software, because here we're not at a very technical level, actually. We're at a quite high and domain-specific level. And there it seems to be much more useful to talk about not data as the parent term, but the umbrella term, so to say, is more that of a digital object. And then data is next to software and next to workflows, digital papers, and all sorts of other resources you can imagine. It's another kind of digital object. And that would mean that data and software share properties that they have in their, property as being a digital object, such as the possibility of having assigned a DOI, for example. But there are also differences, for example, that software is executable and data is not. We think that while the traditional view is not wrong, it's not very helpful for the discussion of FAIR. And we would rather take this approach that we say, okay, data and software do have something in common because they are both digital objects, but they are also different and they need to be discussed separately. Right. That is on this term. Another point or direction of discussion is a bit of the nature of research software. So as Morane mentioned, there's a working group really working on a definition of research software that we really can agree on. So for the moment, I'm just giving a quite vague one, but I mean, it's not too important for the sake of this discussion here. When we say, okay, research software is basically software on which research results depend. And without going any further into that, what we certainly can say is that research software comes in many forms, is written for many different purposes, and goes through many distribution channels. And this diversity and variety makes it so difficult to arrive at a very clear and crisp definition. But what we can say is that, traditionally, research software is often, not always, created as free and or open source software. So this term of FOSS, because traditionally there has been a big push and sympathy in the scientific communities for making things open source. And as Morane also mentioned, FAIR and FOSS, there's a clear overlap of objectives, because both are about like making things available and usable for the peers in the community, but it's really not exactly the same. Because FOSS is very much about making source codes open and using open licenses. While in FAIR, and again, so referring what was written in the traditional FAIR paper, where data is used as the prime resource to define the principles upon, open data is explicitly not a requirement. So the accessibility principle, which would be about this license in the open, does not say it needs to be an open license. But it needs to be just defined what the rules for accessing the resource is. And if it's closed, that's okay, if there are good reasons for it. And if you think about data, that's also logical, because you just do have data that are subject to privacy sensitivity concerns. For example, patients' health records used in studies. There it's clear that you cannot share them openly while you want to be compliant with data protection regulations. But these concerns, you could say, are not in the same way valid for research software, right? So can there anything be in the software itself that is really confidential, or is it really, or maybe if you do it in the way, you could always make a version that is not dependent on that? And you could even argue that, okay, maybe there is even a demand to make those methods available as part of the good scientific method. So good scientific practice is just to describe your method, and if your method is software, then please share it. And I'm not going to resolve this conflict here now and just say, okay, it's indeed an ongoing discussion and it's not solved yet. But so the question is, should FAIR software require open licenses? And I'm just going to put that question to you now again. So what do you think? Should FAIR for software require the software to have an open license? And why or why not? So please give a short reason for your answer. So the first two say yes or tend towards yes. Third one as well. And giving reasons of reproducibility, availability, transparency, open science ideals. When we also have one who says no, because FAIR just does not imply open. It can be closed and still FAIR. Another one saying, okay, if we should be recommended, because if you want to have it to be findable and accessible, so we're getting a few more no's. Also saying that license is enough. And also research software produced in research facilities may be closed. Research facility of enterprises especially. The question is then maybe if they publish their software at all with their papers, but then could be another interesting discussion. Yeah, another no here. Yeah, with partnerships that dictates conditions. That can also be a limitation or a reason for not open sourcing software. Only quite with public funds. And there's also like, and not always. Yeah, for example, if the tests use sensitive data, then you could not test it when not sharing the data. So this is like a partially. Yeah. But maybe you could argue you could test with synthetic data, but that is a complex issue in itself. When people are unsure, yeah, yes, or at least by default, research knowledge in the source code. Yeah, that is exactly also why people think there should at least be a recommendation or an incentive for open sourcing code. Yeah, and another no is citing the accessibility principle that says restriction or restricted access is okay as long as you state what the conditions are. Okay, anyway, thanks for that. I think this very much captures the arguments that we have in this discussion. And it's difficult to decide what we need. And there's another no, by the way, that's fairness is about the description of the research object and the condition to access, and it doesn't need to be open according to how FAIR was defined. Right, so I'm going to leave it at that, a bit more food for thought. Another interesting point in the FAIR discussion is that about like how FAIR relates to software quality. So of course, in research software engineering, the quality of software is always a major concern. And early on in the discussion, the focus was on this FAIR and software quality, and yeah, to what extent can FAIR meet the expectations for software quality or not? And we couldn't really come to a crisp conclusion yet, but what we saw, what helped a bit to really distinguish between what we call the form and the function of software. And the form meaning everything like you could basically see if you look at the software statically, at the code files. And these are things that can be covered by FAIR in a way, and that relates to things like code quality, maintainability, level of documentation, how software is structured, things, and these are all documentation provided, metadata provided, formats used, things you can really access when looking at the code objects. And those seem there are always FAIR principles that you can translate to. Also, like, are they provided at some GitHub repository? Do they have a DOI? How do you access them? That's all stuff that you can translate from the FAIR principles, and they cover a certain part of software quality, but more really of the form. And then the whole other part of software quality relates more to functionality. That means to be the functional correctness of the algorithm that is implemented, security considerations, but also maybe computational efficiency, like runtime performance, memory usage, these kind of things that you cannot see immediately only by looking at the code. And quality considerations, these dimensions clearly go kind of beyond FAIR, we would say. And interestingly, that's also true for the FAIR data principles, if you think about that, because I mean, the FAIR data principles don't say anything that concerns the quality of the data in the FAIR data set. It's really about the form in which it is provided and how it is made accessible and reusable for other people. But you could have like let's say like a rubbish data set that is completely FAIR, and a prime example maybe of making it FAIR, but it could be completely useless for research purposes. So that's important to keep in mind. But also here, maybe that's a bit of an interesting discussion question. And again, the question is what you think. So should FAIR, either for data or for software or for both, should also take content quality into account? So that means, should FAIR talk about the quality of the data, or should FAIR for software talk about the say functional correctness or other functional behavior properties about the software, and then again, why or why not? Would it be a good idea or desirable or rather not? What do you think? So first quick answer was no, bad data is good data. A bit more explanation on that one would be nice, probably. Another no, code review should be part of a publication process. Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. And I hope we see more code reviews or real code reviews in the future anyway. Not quality is relative. I think that's important point too. So who would define then quality standards that we could measure? I mean, measuring fairness is already difficult enough. Another no, quality is subjective. Yeah, that's similar to being relative. Also, we have a yes, so here's a different position, but only as part of reusability. Does it what it says on the tin? So yeah, this is a bit of a validation check that you actually really get what's on the outside, what is described there. Yeah. So no for data, but twin principles about software should include quality. I'm not sure if that means FAIR principles or principles in general. I think principles about software and in general, they would include that. Quality is too complex and varies a lot. Can be subjective, sure. I mean, for sure, it wouldn't be an easy task. Reusability part of FAIR implies quality of data. Yeah, but of the form of the data. Yeah, I mean, if it's completely crap data in a reusable way, you could at least find out that it's crap data. Maybe that's a bit the perspective to take. Some aspects of interoperability relate to quality. That's true, but the question is about which kind of quality. Yeah. Functional correctness seems vital for interoperability and reproducibility. That's true. Well, the question is like, how can it be accessed, and does FAIR really say something about that? It's a bit indirect, I think, in the definition of how the principles are phrased. Another yes here would be good, but subjective, and it's kind of difficult. Yeah, I agree on those. Okay, thanks for this. I think this discussion could go on, and maybe we can continue it a bit later. So we'll come back to interoperability and reusability later in the breakouts. We've compiled here like a short, let's say, FAIR software reading list that you can revisit if you like after this workshop. The one is again the link to the first paper that we've written about that. Morane had it in her slides already. The second is her own report on the FAIR report on fairness of software with the high-level principles. There's a link to the working group that you will also get on other slides again, and which the next part will be about. And then the next two links are, say, more specific and practical tips that you can already do now, although the discussion is not finished. But what are things that are recommended to make your software FAIR, if not completely fair? So one of the top 10 fair data and software things are an outcome of some global sprint activity. And I would say like the most attention currently, at least in the Netherlands, goes to the 5 recommendations for fair software, fairsoftware.eu, maintained by the Netherlands eScience Center. I'm just very quickly going to show you those as one indication of what means that actually in practice. It's not like going through of principles, but it's just 5 things that might not be looking very surprising to you, because it's in principle good software engineering practices, but which do contribute to making some piece of software fair. And the first one is just, okay, use a publicly accessible repository with version control. If your software is on Git and you control it, that's a good thing. Makes it also findable, accessibility. You keep control of versions, which is one of the characteristics of software. So that's a good start. Second, definitely add a license. And the recommendations on fairsoftware.eu also don't require that's an open source license. Maybe there's a recommendation, but it's not a requirement. But a license is important. So to tell users what you can do, what they can do with your software and rather not. Third one is the recommendation to register the code or the software in the community registry. And that's meaning, so typically it's domain-specific registries that make software just much better findable than Google itself or Google alone would do it. Because it's, yeah, usually you can tag your software. They help to set up the real metadata. And so people could also find that software if they're looking for something in the region of without knowing the exact terms. So that's another recommendation. Fourth recommendation, to enable citations of the software. So by either clearly stating which paper to cite or include a CFF file as a citation file, format file that defines how to cite it. So different possibilities, but just do let users know how to cite the software and thus to give you credit for it. And 5, so the recommendation is use a software quality checklist, which does then not really distinguish between form and function aspects of quality, but the website just contains links to a number of domain-specific software quality checklists. For example, don't recall exactly what's on there, but CRUN would have one for R packages, and then there's another one by the Software Sustainability Institute where you even get a bit of like interactive advice by experts on how high quality your software is, and there's a couple of things more that you could use. Right, and so my very last question in this part to you is, if we take these 5 recommendations, how much do you already follow them when you code? Yeah? On a scale from never to always, how would you rate these 5 things? So how often do you have your code in a repository, in a version control repository? How often do you give it a license and the other ones? And now I'm curious to see if we see more or less the same picture as last time, or if this group is a bit different. Only 4 answers in, so let's wait a bit. 6 answers. Yeah, I think we get more or less the same pattern. So yeah, and so it's quite common and widespread good practice already to use version control and to give licenses. But the other principles are a bit less well known, or a bit like less well integrated in people's accustomed working process, I would say. But this is also something the SORSE and RSE community will work on to promote these practices a bit more, I guess. So 13 seems to be it. And I think then we are at the end of this small introduction to FAIR and software. And I think it's just time for a break, unless someone has some urgent questions they want to discuss before.
Thank you, Anna-Lena. There are some comments in the chat,
Right.
but there's a lot of comments in the chat, and we should go into the break because if not, we will be off schedule. So what I propose is going to you all, if you have questions, to continue adding that to the chat, and we will use the time after the updates to do some questions and answers and discuss the subjects that we have here in the chat. If someone has something urgent to say, you are also welcome to do that now. If not, we will reconvene at 15. For me, it's 6:15, but I don't know where you are. So, and thanks again, Anna-Lena. It was a great activity. I really like the first part where we need to see which principle, which foundational principle is the guiding principle. Kind of,
it's a bit tricky, huh?
A bit tricky. I think that you should hide the responses and give people the time to like response on their own time.
Without the other. Yeah, maybe we can I think Mentimeter now they do have like quiz questions. When I did the first one of those slides, that feature wasn't available. Well, I should change it maybe. Yeah. Anyway, thanks. Enjoy your break. I will have a look at the chat in the meantime as well.
Excellent. Thank you all. See you in a bit. I do have 6:16 on my watch. I'm not sure if everyone's back, but I'm going to start because we have a very intensive agenda. We have some updates, and then we want to have a good discussion on the breakout rooms on the last part. So let's start. Here we will, in this part of the session, we will hear the FAIR4 software introduction for the working group and the update for the 4 different subgroups that are taking place inside the full working group, and we'll have some questions and answers. Maybe we'll discuss some of the things that you have seen on the chat, if you want to elaborate answers on that subject. If you have any question, please feel free to use the chat. Someone might answer you on the chat, or we will discuss that live. So first, we want to acknowledge all the members and contributors of the FAIR4 software working group. We are currently approximately 140 members, and we have a steering committee composed from maybe 9 members of the working group. I'm not sure, and we want to acknowledge them and for present and past members. Here on the slides, we have the link to the working group. If you want to join, please join if this subject interests you. So this is, as I said before, a joint working group for RDA, FORCE11, and it's also a ReSA task force. It was endorsed by RDA in September 2020. We are coordinating a range of existing community-led discussion on how to define and effectively apply FAIR principles to research software and how to achieve adoption of these principles. Just a quick note, can someone tell me that you hear me and you see the screen? Because I feel like I'm talking in the air now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. That's nice to know. So strange doing workshops online like that. Okay, continuing. So the motivation for this working room, as we elaborated on in the first section, I don't want to say anything else here, just that we want to note that software is not just data, and we think that a community-led discussion is needed to this definition. Even if at the end of this discussion we will define the same principles, it's important to recognize the specific nature of software and take it into account when dealing with FAIR principles. The deliverables we have, we are engaged to provide within the working group are on the 6-month anniversary, we'll need to do the definition of the FAIR principle for research software. Then on the 12th month, a document providing guidelines on how to apply the FAIR principles for research software. And after 18 months, we'll need to have a document summarizing the implementation guidelines and adoption examples. So before we continue into the subgroups presentation, I'm going to ask you all to go to the notes. I'm giving you the link inside the chat now. We have a document where we can capture the notes from the session, which can also capture questions. You should know that at the end, we will also make all the things that we created here today available in a fair manner, I hope. And so I'm going to ask you to go to this document and add yourself to the participant list. It's on the session 2, November 19. I think that the page is page number 2. Just take your time. We'll take 2 minutes for that. That way we will know if you are who you are, and if you are on the working group, and if you have joined one of the subgroups work. It's easier for us to communicate later on. I see that most of you, I don't know if most of you, some of you are on the document entering names and institutions or affiliations. I don't know if it's all participants. I see that we are 21 participants and a bit less on the notes. Of course, if you don't want to enter your name and make it on record, I won't force you to do that. I'm very glad that you are here with us in any case. So let's continue now that I see that it's filling up nicely. To the initial phase, the subgroups work. The aim was a pre-work of writing the principles, some way to get some work done before really defining the FAIR principles. These subgroups were supposed to run from July to November 2020. Some of the subgroups are still running. Some already gave their report. And with no further ado, I will introduce to you subgroup 1 with Dan Katz, which is here. Daniel, would you like to present?
Yeah, thank you. So we had about 15 people originally that looked at the original FAIR principles paper. This is the FAIR principles for data. And specifically did not look at the other work that has been previously done for FAIR for research software, so that we could really have a fresh look, starting with the data principles and just thinking about things from scratch in some sense. And the process that we went through was to vote on each of the 4 foundational principles and then each of the 15 guiding principles, and to say if we thought that they applied as written to software, if they could apply to software, if they were changed a bit, or if they just don't apply to software at all. We then had a collaborative working document where we broke up these 19 principles and had little discussions about each one, why people voted the way they did. And then that was summarized in a new draft document on the FAIR principles, or at least a proposed set of FAIR principles for research software. And we're iteratively working through that document more slowly than I would have liked. As many of you know, when you have people in 3 continents, it's very hard to get together, and sometimes you actually have to talk about things rather than just doing things in writing. So we're working through this in I would say, we're making good progress. We're just not quite as far as I thought we would have been by this time. But the document is pretty close to complete. So next, yeah, thank you. So the way the document looked not very long ago, it's not 100% quite like this again right now because it's changed a little bit, but it basically starts by explaining the differences between data and software, and then does a kind of an initial translation where we expand the term metadata that's used in the FAIR principles a number of times, first into metadata and data, and then convert it into metadata and software, and just kind of read through things and see how does that look. We then continued work on that based on the previous document where we'd had all the discussion. And that has led us to add a new principle that says metadata about software should follow the FAIR data principles. The F&A, fair and accessible principles, don't change too much. They're pretty similar to what they were, but we have some gaps that appear in practice and how we actually can apply them, which leads to probably future work that needs to be done. The I and R principles change fairly dramatically in some ways, because the idea of interoperability and the idea of reusability for software are not as independent as they are for data in some sense. And so there are some things that just don't make sense as they were defined for data, and some things that that need to be redefined a bit. So we're really trying to work through those now. And I think our initial idea is that interoperability we think of as the exchange of metadata or data between software, and reusability really turns into both usability and reusability, which is does the software actually follow community standards and community practices, and can it be used in the context of other software as well as by itself. What I think will come out of this will be a new statement of FAIR for Research Software Principles, and then we will compare that statement with work that other groups have done and see how does this actually look. Oh, and sorry, and then I also just meant to say that some of the gaps that we have are related to software metadata and software identifiers, and the fact that software is more complex than data, and issues about how we treat documentation specifically. I think that's it.
I see that there's a hand raised. Maybe
yes.
We can answer that.
Andrea?
Yes. Hello, thank you. This is great to know about the progress. I was wondering if you had any thoughts in those discussions about the role of vocabularies in the interoperability sense for software, as specifically one of the interoperability principles talks about vocabularies describing the data being fair. So have you translated that into the software principle?
So I think it will be translated. This is still ongoing a little bit, but I think this will be similar to what you were just saying, that we want the exchange of data between different pieces of software or software that reads or writes data, to do it in a way that's fair, so that the data is fair if it's being made public. If it's not being made public and it's just something that's being used, like let's say one piece of software sending a message to a different piece of software, then FAIR doesn't apply directly because we don't care about that being findable or accessible. It's internal. But the kind of the basic idea still does, that we want to follow standards and use vocabulary so that both sides of such exchanges are effectively doing things in a manner that's kind of as close to fair as it can be without, again, it fully being fair.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to go to the next group with Leyla, which will present to us the subgroup 2.
Yes, hello everybody. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Morane, for the introduction. I'm going to present the work that we have been doing in the subgroup 2, which is led mainly by Michelle Barker now, and it was previously led by Mateusz Kuzak. So we are analyzing the FAIR principles in other contexts, in other research objects. And we have covered computational notebooks. Some people argue that they should be seen exactly as any other piece of software. Some people argue that they are quite different, so they should have some principles on their own. So we had a look to those. We had a look to training materials and computational workflows and other research objects to see what commonalities in general they have. From these, the one that probably has more material is computational workflows, thanks to some community initiatives like the Workflows Hub or the Common Workflow Language. We have not completed the work on this one. So if you still want to join our group and contribute there, you are more than welcome to do so. Right now, we have a final report for those that we already check, and we are going to present a summary right now. So for the training materials, we found that one of the strong elements in there is providing a download that contains all the course materials. So it is easy to have them as a whole, as a unit. We also saw that schema.org, or for that matter, any other schema or control vocabulary, should be used for the metadata. One of the works that we found was particularly focusing on schema.org. That's why we mentioned this in particular. Schema.org has the learning resource to model training material. And if a training material is part of a course, they also have these course schema, so you can tie the two things together. We can go to the next one, Morane, thank you. Yes, so for the computational notebooks, something that maybe make them different from some other pieces of software is the versioning. I have not seen many notebooks with an explicit version. Maybe when they put it in a GitHub, they will put the version of the general repository, the semantic versioning that it is commonly used in software. But the version inside the notebooks is not that common. And also, they kind of change, and you might not realize they have changed, particularly if they are outside a versioning system that will say you, oh, there was a commit and these lines change. Sometimes it's difficult to realize about it. And now with initiatives like Collab, where more people can edit at the same time, well, it becomes even more difficult. Something important here, that it is true for computational notebooks, but also for software, and in general, we would say for any research objects, as we also see later, is the citation. The citation is important, and the provenance and having access to that data is very, very important. In general, what we saw, in addition to the citation, is that the identification is very important as well. And in cases of software, even for data, I mean, I have not seen it commonly done for data, but it is important for data as well. We should be able to identify the particular versions. For software, we should be able to identify the releases or the commits. Exactly what level of granularity you want to go, that is difficult. For some groups, some going to the commit will be essential. For some others, they will be happy with releases. So I would say that it is one of these elements where the community plays a very important role. And the use of specialized registries. The FAIR principles actually don't say much about specialized registries. They say that the thing has to be findable via a registry, but they are happy if it is a generic registry like search engine, one of those that people use every day. But we have seen that really using specialized registries can make things easier and more findable and kind of give them some context. So that is what we have done so far in our subgroup 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Leyla. So I'm going to the next slide, which is subgroup 3. Our subject was research software definition. I'm leading this subgroup, and our aim was to review existing definitions and specifying the scope of the working group outputs by providing this community agreement on research software definition. So we have set a set of goals to achieve this mission. We want a concise community definition. We want it measurable, so citable and easily located. We had the assignment of this goal. Realistic, I don't think it, well, it's still an open question if it's realistic or not. For now, I hope it is, but we are not meeting our first deadline, which was October 2020, and we are now aiming December 2020. At the moment, we have collected many quotes that discuss research software in general and software, well, software in general and research software in particular. We had also collected very nice software examples that we reviewed and voted on if they are research software or not. And to have a taste of what we did for this collection, I've gathered here on this next slide 3 examples. that are can be considered research software or not, regarding some of the definitions that are in the literature. So, for example, on the top here you have the icon of Excel software, which can be used in research for analyze data. So you can use it in the research context, but is it research software? We have a kind of nice consensus that it is not research software, but the subject is a bit more complex, because then you think about algorithms and macros that are generated with Excel. Is that research software? The next example here is the Scala programming language, which is a functional programming language meeting an object-oriented programming language, started as a research project at the Lausanne University. And here in this example, I show you the article of that started this project. So at the time, it was a research software. Is it now still a research software, or is it something that is not considered at the moment research software? So that's another question. And the third example that I'm having here, that's a software module of something that is quite considered research software, which is registered and deposited in the HAL National Archive. It's a French National Archive with metadata about the software itself, with a citation of the software, and it's created in a software institution by researchers. So there's little doubt that it is not research software. So some of the questions that come up, how we should consider, is it research software? Will the researcher be expected to cite the software? Who wants the software to be cited? Is there a research result that is dependent on this software? So maybe Excel is part of this in the scope of FAIR. Was the software evaluated or reviewed as part of a research process? So that's the questions that we raise during the discussion, and we will put in our final report. Hopefully we'll have a concise community agreement of research software definitions. And I give the next slide to Neil Chu Hong, who will present subgroup 4.
Thank you, Morane. So subgroup 4 is titled New Research Related to FAIR Software. And the purpose of this group is to look at the recent research and studies around FAIR software, in particular, the things that have come out since the Towards FAIR Principles for Research Software was published in about submitted in about August 2019 last year. So it's really looking to see, given that FAIR has had a lot of progress in the last year, what other things have been done in terms of reports, workshops, papers in the community that can help inform and influence the work of this working group. As part of this, we were also looking to reread the Towards FAIR Principles for Research Software to find out whether the state of FAIR software has changed since that was published. And so this kind of goes in tandem with the other subgroups that have been working, particularly subgroup 1, which is looking at the fresh look at it, and also trying to see how different people perceive things like FAIR software in practice. So this is one of the working groups that has been slightly delayed in starting up and is continuing just now. What we're doing is running a survey in the community to get feedback on the rewritten FAIR principles the rewritten FAIR principles as described in the Towards FAIR Principles paper, and getting an understanding of whether people find these easier to understand or perhaps even harder to understand. We're also looking to collect examples of what people think are FAIR pieces of software and where some pieces of research software might not be FAIR, and getting an understanding of why people in the community think that. And then this subgroup will be analysing the issues and the places where people found the FAIR principles most confusing, and this will be compared with the other subgroup results. The other thing out of this group is creating a Zotero reading list. So one of the things that we can have is a list, an up-to-date list of all of the different publications relating to FAIR. Can you go on to the next slide, Morane? So the survey is still running, and I just post a link because we are looking for more feedback and input just now. So if you've not already taken this survey, please do go to that link. Please pass it on to your colleagues and people you think are interested. So some early results from the survey. Respondents consider findability and accessibility the most important foundational principles. So people feel that of all of these are the ones that most represent what fairness is. But potentially that's also because those are the ones that people find the least confusing just now. So there is still some ambiguity about what interoperability and reusability mean for software. One question that is coming up, given the way that people have responded, is what the role is of different types of infrastructure to make software more fair. One example, for instance, is digital repositories. Does placing a piece of software into particularly a preservation repository automatically make it findable and accessible? And I think a thing that I'll mention based on the results is that it's interesting to see that a lot of people, when asked for what they felt was the most fair piece of software that they interacted with, chose things which were well-used libraries and frameworks. And so in some sense, they're considering interoperability and reusability here as being them being able to interoperate and reuse it. Thinking back to the Mentimeter results and what Anna-Lena said, the other thing to note is that a lot of people tied the license to reusability. And then the final thing, which goes back to what Leyla presented, is there's still a lot of questions around how you treat complex software objects and things that border on software. So I'm hoping very much that that subgroup comes to some outcomes that we can reuse. So once again, I'd like people to circulate that link and take the survey themselves. It will be open till the end of the year, but we will also be doing periodic reviews of the data so far.
Thank you, Neil. And now we get to our nice section of questions. If someone wants to do it live and not just in the chat, I invite you to raise your hand, or just maybe we'd see if someone's interested. For now, I will stop sharing my screen because we don't need to see the word questions on the screen. And I'll see if there's anyone that's interested in asking a question live. If not, we can go back to the questions that were already raised in the first part of our workshop. Just a moment. The first one I found, but it's not the first one in the questions, is software with closed license reusable? Someone wants to comment on this question?
Well, I guess or Neil? Or who wanted?
You can go first, Anna-Lena.
No, I mean, I would think, I mean, it relates to both how would you define reuse, so what exactly do you want to do with that, but then also what kind of license, right? I mean, it could be and it could not be. There's a lot of definition work still to do, yeah.
Thank you, Anna-Lena. Yes, Neil.
Yeah, I had a similar answer. I think it depends on the type of closed license and the way you choose to define reusability for software. I think when you look at it in conjunction with how you read the FAIR for data principles, it is possible to have a fair closed data license, but it's also possible to have an unfair closed data license. So I think it's, I think it will partly depend on how we define reusability here for software. But in general, I would say you can have a closed license.
Thank you, Neil. I see Dan has his hand raised.
Yeah, I guess I would say that it also is that it can be reused, but the reuse is subject to the license. So the license potentially is giving conditions on who can reuse it, but the people that are allowed to use it through the license can reuse it.
Yes, Neil.
I just remember provocatively somewhere else I said that the only reason why the only license that is not a fair license is no license.
That's a good remark. I see another question about the license of the metadata. Do you have some comments about that?
This is a more interesting one if you are into the legal aspects of it, because arguably objective metadata cannot be copyrighted, so it's automatically in the public domain. But I think I will bore an RSE audience if I go into legal geekery on this workshop.
But someone, if I can follow up on that, someone really made like comment recently that like in that sense also all data would be by definition in the public domain if you say like all data is facts and you cannot like copyright facts. But I mean, is it a difference then between like the fact itself and you do actually license its representation, or can you maybe briefly say what the fundamental difference is?
I see Dan. Oh, okay, yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. I was going to say that I think that metadata is not actually data in some sense. It can be description. So I think it is things that can be licensed or copyrighted in some cases. While in other cases, I agree with you, Neil. Some of it is just factual. But I think the question is, where is the metadata being stored? And right, if it's in a software repository, then I would assume that it's more or less covered by the license that is with the software repository, even though there's some legal questions there. And if you're submitting your software to a repository and you're submitting the metadata with it, I would, I guess, argue that you're implicitly giving the repository a license then to use that metadata in a general way as part of your deposit.
Yes, Neil?
Yeah, I think it really is about the accessibility more than the license, because again, in many jurisdictions, you have a right to use that metadata, even if and view it, even if there's not other things you can do. But if you can't, if it's not available to you because it's not accessible, then that defeats the FAIR principles. Yeah, I believe the legal precedent is if it's completely objective and complete, for instance, an encyclopedic work, then it's treated as uncopyrightable. But if it's subjective, then there is some form of creativity, and then you can copyright it. But yeah, we're going down a legal rabbit hole.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just going to say that I think that the way that I've seen this before, and maybe this is US, I don't completely know, is that if the data itself cannot be copyrighted, but the presentation of the data can. And so as long as there's some creativity that goes into it. So having a table of entries in alphabetic order, probably that table can't be copyrighted, but if the table is sorted in some unusual way, then potentially it can, even though the underlying data still can't.
Thank you, Dan, Neil, Anna-Lena. Someone, oh, I see Renato's hand.
Just a quick question. So you mentioned facts at some point. I've never heard about this distinction between data and facts and how one can be copyrighted and the other one doesn't. Could you clarify that a little bit more?
Who wants to get
at least
that question?
So,
yeah.
Okay, so at least in the US, the court rulings over a fairly long period have been that facts are not subject to copyright. And the case that this came about, that's most well known, was about a telephone book. Where somebody, a phone company, had collected a bunch of information and published it in a phone book, and then somebody copied it and published it themselves. And the court ruled that that collection of names and phone numbers was factual and it was not able to be copyrighted.
Yeah. For software and in particular, the case that's going through just now in the Supreme Court in the US is the one around whether or not you can consider an API to be a creative work. So that's the it's Google versus Oracle, I think. And we will find out at some point when they decide how that settles in the US, but it's still an open question. When it relates to fairness for software, I think it's interesting because, when we consider the metadata for software, what do we consider to be important to understand its fairness? And also, what do we consider to be factual, which is basically not a creative work and then not subject to intellectual property or copyright. It's a piece of information versus something which gives you additional interpretation, perhaps maybe is the right word. I do wonder where that will go, particularly around things like software catalogs. So maybe that's an open question for this community, is how should records and software catalogs be shared?
Very interesting question to see how it's going to go. Do we have a last comment before we go to our break, before the subgroups work? It's now or never. No, I'm kidding. You can say something after the break as well. So I'm going to leave you, let you go on the break, get refreshed before the real work is starting, because now it's you who will do the work and not us. Well, we are going to do the work with you. So let's do that. Thank you everyone for this lovely discussion, and see you in a bit.
Morane, just how much time?
We have 10 minutes, so let's be back at the hour and 2 minutes. So I'm going to say what I've said on the off discussion, that normally we are going to do breakout rooms now. I'm going to share my screen and show you the subjects we have prepared for the breakout rooms. On the first session, we decided at the end not to do breakout rooms because we thought that everyone wanted, well, the participants said that they wanted to listen to all the subject because the subject was so interesting. And so now I'm going to ask you to vote maybe in the Zoom with a yes or no. Yes for breakout rooms, and no to stay all together. So, oh, sorry, let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. Up. Yes. Okay. Yes. Present. So from the start, now we get to the part of the agenda with the breakout rooms with a nice subject we have, which is what does interoperability mean for software? What does reusability mean for software? And how would you want to get credit for making your software fair? So this is the this is the activity that we've prepared for you, with some Google Docs prepared for that activity. I would love to know if you prefer doing the breakout room to have more time to discuss one of the subjects, which can be very interesting and enlightening, or do you prefer staying in a main room, which will deal with all subjects one after the other, would say 15 minutes for each subject, with the same facilitator, but instead of having just the 5 or 4 people in the subgroup, we'll all participate in the note-taking for that subject. Was that clear?
Yeah, so Renato is suggesting we use the Zoom interaction buttons to say yes if you want to go to breakout rooms.
Yes, exactly.
And no if you prefer to discuss all the subjects in the group.
And if you don't know what the buttons mean, you can just vote in the chat and say what you think.
Yeah, and you can get to the buttons by clicking on the participants link at the bottom of your screen, and then you'll be able to see a set of buttons near the bottom of the participants.
Thank you, Neil. So I'm kind of confused, Renato. You said yes for breakout, and you vote no in the votes.
Yes, because I think we are so few that it might be better to do the full discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. Okay. So I see that because we are a few people, well, we are a very lovely group. We are 14, which is a lot for everyone to be heard. But let's go with this, like we did in the first session. And I will invite Leyla to start with room number 1. What we did in the first session, we shared the screen of the notes of the breakout room. Do you want to do it, or should I continue sharing and do that?
If we are going to stay all in the same room, maybe it's easier if you continue sharing.
Okay, just a moment. So, oh, sorry. Okay, just a moment. I'm going to go and fetch that link. So here you go. So if you go to the notes, maybe someone can do it in the chat, but if you go to the notes, normally in the breakout room section, there's a link that will appear, breakout rooms, and here it's on Leyla.
Yeah, it is on the chat as well.
Thank you, Leyla. So I give the floor to you.
Okay, good. So in our first discussion subject, we want to understand better what interoperability means for software. We have some definitions here that were provided by Fotis for the previous session and taken directly from the FAIR4RS Software paper. So what is, according to the standard glossary of the software engineering terminology, what is interoperability? And we have semantic interoperability as well defined here. It might be that none of them fully apply to what we think should be covered by interoperability by software. That is okay. And we also have here some questions. We work with the question number 2 and question number 3 during the first session. I added question number 1 here. What software interoperability does not cover or should not cover or doesn't mean. And I added this one because sometimes I find easier to define things in terms of what they are not supposed to be or what they are not supposed to do. So I thought that maybe it could be helpful for others as well. So what I propose is let's go to add our thoughts to any of the questions. The more thoughts, the more questions that you can add your thoughts in there. It will be great. And then we said that we were going to have 15 minutes for these, right?
Yeah, yes. I'm going to tell. Yeah, I'm going to tell you when we have like 5 minutes left.
Yeah, perfect. So when we are 5 minutes to the time to finish, we will do some summary. And yeah, maybe we can select 1 or 2 questions or 1 or 2 comments to live discussion later when we have some more material here. So let's go into work all together in the document. Thank you.
So I'm having a bit of trouble finding the correct question for my thoughts, because either I can like put negative things that interoperability does not cover, or I can frame them as the single most important element. So where could I just like add thoughts what it covers, but that's not necessarily the most important? Should I just put it under question 3?
Yes, go ahead, but put it at the end. That way we'll know that it's not covered by one of the questions, but you can put just your thoughts into the document.
Yeah, we can add that question. What really is important to be covered by interoperability? Yeah, thank you.
I think, Leyla, we have 5 minutes or a bit less, like 4 minutes.
Okay, so let's go in, try to do like a quick summary while people are still writing. So what interoperability should not cover? So we have here, interoperability commonly is about pieces of software working together, but that is a high requirement. So, I mean, this comment might require the whole group to redefine what interoperability in terms of FAIR principles mean for software. Very dynamic, and I think this is related to the previous one, and it could be out of the scope. Yes, I mean, interoperability is rather complex for software. So not constrained to technical requirements, but maybe going to standards. So maybe going to standards, it's less complex than talking about software working together. Even more when some people say that it should be automatically working together or effortless working together, and these adjectives that we really don't know exactly what they mean, what automatic means in this context. Should not include legal operability. I mean, including, I know that for principles touch some bits about legal issues, as we saw in the discussions, what the law says in US versus what the law says in the European Union. But this is a very complex subject. So yes, I mean, if we try to stay away of that, it would be a good idea. User interaction. So this is not interoperability. Oh, yes. This I didn't think about it before, but it is very important to really say what is within the scope and what is what you are not covering. So good. Now let's going to move to the following question.
Can I say something? Sorry, yes. Leyla. Hi. Hi, nice to see you. So I'm sorry because I had to leave for a while for another meeting, but in terms of interoperability, I was thinking that would that like be represented also as like best practices because software that is like best practices for software engineering in terms of how things are set up in the software. That means that it's more clear and therefore it's easy to interact with that software, right? And you can see this in like community software that is highly contributed by many people. They have rules for contributing. They not only have rules, but also the code is structured in a manner that follows these guidelines, because otherwise it cannot be contributed by, and it cannot be interoperable with other pieces, no?
Thank you, Danny. I think maybe using data formats standards and the mention of standards that we have in question 4, that it is about what interoperability should cover, maybe aligns with what you mentioned about best practices for software. Yes, we should consider those. I don't remember if they're actually considered in the paper software for towards FAIR principles for research software, but it is something that we should consider when we are reviewing that and in the work that has been done in Dan's group about a fresh look to the FAIR principles.
But I wonder if when you say best practices, that actually should be covered in the other aspects of FAIR as well. So I don't think it's exclusive for interoperability, is it? So what you can talk about the best practices about findability and assigned identifiers, and also relates to the discussion earlier about quality. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, actually, maybe it would fit better in other places like in reusability or accessibility, maybe not, but in reusability, definitely, no, because if something follows the best practices for software engineering, then it would likely be more reusable.
Mari, that to the notes.
I'm going to stop here with our discussion, even though I feel it's very interesting, and I really like your last comment about best practices. It made me think about the SPDX standard, which is the software package data exchange. I don't know if you know that. Which can be under interoperability. Anyway, I'm sorry, Leyla, thank you very much.
That's fine, thank you, Morane. And if people want to keep contributing to the document, we will have a look later to any additional comment. Thank you very much.
Yes, exactly, thanks. So I'm going to pass down the floor to Carlos. Maybe I will continue sharing my screen, right? Would you?
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind, then makes it easier to transition between one and the other. So I've just put the link to the second document about reusability. So I'm going to use almost the same mechanic as we did just now. So I'm going to focus on 2 questions, but maybe it's useful if we try to answer first together. And I want to put you all in the gear on why do we want to do reusability in the first place? So think about the use cases for reusability. Do we want to reuse software just because it's fun, just because it's interesting to play with what somebody else built, or what are the underlying reasons why do we want to reuse software? So that's the first question, and I will maybe give you a few minutes to think about that, type something, and hopefully we'll be finding some commonality, some interesting things, and then I'll summarize at the bottom and add a new question in a couple of minutes. Okay. Okay, so avoid reinventing the wheel. That's completely agree. That's something that also came up in the previous session, and that we're always strongly advocating for. Do not.
We perhaps also discuss the different ways of reusing.
Yes, so that's a little bit it's a bit set it as a trick question, but that's exactly why I ask this: is why do we want to reuse? Do we want to reuse it to reproduce somebody else's results? Is that our objective, or is our objective to use the software in a different context? So these are different use cases for reuse. Is that what you meant, Alejandra?
Yeah, so but I'm thinking that we could divide the use cases and then the benefits of reusing in those particular use cases. So in a way, at the moment, we're considering both things all together, but that's fine. I mean, we could do that distinction later. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't understand the comment of we reuse to get credit. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, that's me. I put it down because if you are reused in a research context, that means that someone else is using your software, and if we want to get this mechanism of getting credit for using for software, like with articles, we need to cite this software and pass it on. So that's why I've changed a bit about the be reused.
Right. So I think I agree with you in that it's super necessary, but I wouldn't put it like as like why we want reuse. So I don't think we want reuse to or is it something that we really want? I just try to put myself in the. It's like, oh, okay, I want to do something. I want to reuse something that exists, but not to get credit, or
yes, that's a good question. Very, very good question, because now if you are a researcher that develops software and you are asked to make your software fair, the question is why to make a software reusable. And so the reason I'm putting that is because the one that created the software wants to get credit for the software. So this person should add elements that will enable reusability later on.
I agree. I just think it's a different question. It's like, what do you want to make software reusable? Not what you want to reuse software, right?
Okay.
Which is probably interesting because the next block is about credit for software. So maybe that's a little bit where Danielle is coming from, right? So if you reuse it, you can get credit. So maybe this also ties to that. Yeah, so then let's move to the second question that I put in the document, that is, what are the limitations to achieve these reuse of software? So yes, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I guess we've all seen wheels being reinvented 20 times. So why are people reinventing wheels? What's stopping them from taking the existing wheels and using them? And they say, no, I need to reinvent mine. And I see unavailability of code. That's an interesting comment. Lack of documentation, how to use software. And so that, I guess, ties a little bit with the quality. Software being unmaintained, abandoned.
I want to ask something about the code not being available.
Yes, please.
How frequent is that someone actually goes and reads the code when you are including or importing a library in Python or Java? I mean, before doing that import or that include, do you really go to the code to see if it is open, if it is well written? And I know that we are here in the research software engineering scope, but going beyond that, for researchers that are not software engineers, do you think that is actually common?
So legally, you have to go and see the license? Sorry, Renato, I see
No, not the license, the code.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say that if you've ever been introduced to the concept of a black box in software, this is something you would like to avoid, because there's knowledge about what software does that cannot be replicated. So in that sense, it would be usable, but it would not be reusable.
Yeah, I think it defeats the purpose. The reason you import a library is not because you find other ways to trust the library without looking at the code. Because if you had to go and look at the code, you could potentially write it yourself. So I think you'd look at how well documented it is, the license it has, the community support, who is using that library to choose to use it. It's not that you necessarily need to read the library to reuse it. At least that's what I think.
That's what I think as well. And
so
then
sorry, in our team, we do read the software of the libraries we use, and sometimes our developers do contribute to this software when there are bugs. So some of the advantages of having access to the libraries and to the software source code is when you have a limitation in the code for a functionality that you need, sometimes helping this project on the way to achieving your specific goal is part of the process. So I think it really depends on the software or an open source project, and proud to be open source.
I agree with that, but I don't think that's a requirement to reuse the library. I mean, if you need to, and if you can, that's great. And then we could discuss it with if you only reuse open libraries or not, and then you have to reuse it. It has to be a library that allows you to do so. So, but I don't think it is a requirement for reuse to understand the whole code.
I agree, it's not a requirement. I pointed out the advantages of having the access and the possibility to read the code and even contribute to it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that here is where the notion of trust is very important, because I know that, for example, I know many researchers that geoscientists who will reuse blindly, well, blindly in quotes, right? But they will have more trust in a library produced by Pangeo, because it's like a wide community, a very common thing to reuse, rather than something that was published last week in a conference, right? And there is this level of trust in also, well, it could be a person that has a high reputation, but you know that something that comes from research sometimes has not been as well developed and tested as some software that is more mature, right?
Okay, so then if I summarize it as sometimes people don't reuse software because they're not able to find it, or because it's not maintained, or because they don't trust the software that is that exists. That those are some of the main reasons why software is not being reused, and people do this reinventing on the wheel. That's actually very interesting as well, Daniel. Thank you. Yeah. So I don't know if how we're doing in terms of time, Morane.
We have a minute left.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think I summarized it like that. That part of it. I mean, all of this is really interesting. So I'll make another pass after tonight to pick up some other points. But I think that there's very, very useful material here. So thanks, everyone. I just want to use my minute to say that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And I will pass to the next activity and go to Neil's document, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Morane. So this is, as others have alluded to, a session that we're going to be talking about credit. And I'm going to ask two questions. But before we do that, I'll just explain a little bit about why we're trying to do this and what we mean by credit. So we are interested in understanding about credit for making software fair, or how you generally accrue credit for software, because it helps FAIR for Research software understand how to define the roadmap to help on adoption and implementation of FAIR principles for research software. So when we talk about credit, what we mean is any way of valuing the work you put into something, in this case, something that is software or research related. And what we're going to do is we're going to answer two questions, and I'm going to ask you to do the first question first, as we did in the last session, and put your details somewhere into the table. Now, has the link to this document been posted in? So I'll just put the link. Oh, thanks, Fotis. The first question we're going to look at is, what are the activities that you receive credit for, and how do you receive that credit? If you want to stay anonymous, just put in some sort of nickname or other identifier. It's just so that we can match up your answers for the first question with the answers for the second question. If you're happy with your name or your initials, please put those in there. So I'm going to give people about 3 minutes to think about that, and just put the main things that you do and how you receive credit for them. Whilst you're doing that, I'll also just kind of do a little running commentary. So a lot of people here, obviously, for a SORSE workshop are involved in developing software, but a lot of people are also publishing articles and reports. A lot of people say that they're receiving credit through citations, particularly of publications. But there are some other things. So people have mentioned things like GitHub stars, community kudos, that's a good one. Salary, yes, salary and promotion. That's one. Just getting paid is often something that you forget about when you're in this kind of community. Everyone does it for the love, not for the money. Yeah, there's another good one from Anna-Lena, is feedback. So I think that's a good example of an intangible bit of credit. So it's sort of linked with your reputation.
Is feedback credit though? I mean, well, it would depend on how you define credit, I guess, no? Like I don't know, is a pull request to my public repository also considered credit?
I think that's a really good question. I think in part it depends on how you value it, because I think credit is, again, a bit like trust that we've just been talking about in the last session. It's something which has value if both you and the community that you choose to exchange it in consider it valuable. So I'd say that kind of feedback would be valuable if you value it, and it gives you, it's sort of indirect credit, perhaps. It might improve your reputation, and you could argue that your reputation is a creditable thing in the community.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, it will also, I mean, in terms of benefit, it will also benefit your tool, no? Because if it's people start contributing to it and fix issues, then that's less work for you to do.
Yeah, I mean, credit,
I think I agree.
Yeah, and credit has of course a very positive connotation, right? So you would probably rather agree that positive student feedback is credit, or if your students even, like, I don't know, suggest you for one of the teaching prizes or stuff. So that could be, while maybe negative feedback does not feel as credit.
But obviously, as with any kind of system of barter or exchange, you can go positive and you can go negative. So I think that's a really good point. Okay, I think we are starting to come to a little stop. I often feel like when we do these kinds of discussions, it's a bit like waiting for popcorn. You need to work out just when the amount of edits are starting to slow down to kind of move on to the next question. Obviously, you can go back in and add things if you think of other things, but that's good. So this question was mostly to get you thinking about the different ways in which you receive credit, see how other people receive credit. The main question we want to ask is a bit further down the page, so there's a break. And so question 2, which Morane has now put up on screen, is about making your software fair. So let's say you have an understanding of what it means to make software fair. So we're not going to kind of argue about what the FAIR principles means. Whatever you think the FAIR software principles means, what would be the way that you would like to receive credit for making your software fair, and why? I also love how colorful this is. Everyone's a different color.
Yeah, that's lovely.
So things that are coming out just now are that a lot of it is about being able to continue writing software, which I guess is sort of something that we might have expected from this community and from the idea of it. But I think that's really useful to know, because it reiterates the idea that fair software and why we should follow FAIR principles is about the making the software somehow better, maybe not in a quality perspective, but better for the community. Also, there are things here about career progression, recognition. It's interesting that people are kind of saying both recognition for being good at software and recognition for being good at research. Some people in terms of specific things, as well as the kind of ones which a lot of people have talked about earlier in how they currently get credit. There are some new things coming up as well. So in particular, some of the things that I see here, a lot of it is around understanding how to have the recognition feed into promotion activities. So some of these have already been described, such as citations and funding, but perhaps there are others that should be considered. And I know that a lot of countries are starting to move away from more rigid lists for academic and research staff and associated staff promotions to things which are more like explain why you've done good for the research community, and you get a more free-form way of entering that. So this might be interesting. I also see here that there's some things around perhaps accreditation or badging. So there was a mention of what some groups like the ACM are doing in terms of reproducibility badging. Maybe there's a question about whether or not having a FAIR badging is useful in terms of gaining credit.
But I think that maybe there has to be like an institutional push for getting some recognition for this, because yes, I mean, if I get a lot of badges, but in the end in my CV this is I cannot put it in my CV, then if in the next European project they are requesting for, oh well, the software has to be released according to the FAIR principles and get a badge, otherwise, I don't know, something less good will happen.
So
maybe these are ways. I don't know.
It is interesting because I think broadly speaking, I would categorize that the three sets of responses are people want to receive credit for FAIR software to progress their career. Others want to receive it because they want to make sure that they can continue developing software. And the third set want to do it because intrinsically they believe software should be fair. And I do wonder, I'm not going to ask this just now, but it's perhaps something that we might want to consider discussing as part of the next stage of the FAIR for research software, is whether that maps to where you are in your career or the type of role that you have. So are you more interested in career progression when you're early in your career and more interested in the sort of the ongoing development of software later on when you're more established? And at what point are you looking to do it because of more altruistic reasons, because you believe in this? So excellent. And I've got a few comments.
But I think that also they are not incompatible. Sorry if I'm interrupting too much.
Oh, no,
you can just tell me to just to shut it and I'll shut it. But I think that they are not incompatible, right? I think that all the people that are here, we are part of this effort because we inherently think that software should be fair. I just think that that if I do my software fair, that's additional work that I have to put into it, and therefore I think it should be appropriately credited.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we've not talked about in this workshop, which is how much more effort is it to make your software fair, or is it perhaps net zero effort, and over what time scale? All right, so I'm going to finish up now unless anyone else has any other remarks. So
There's just one thing, maybe one comment on your last point is that when it is worth making that effort, because I think also we shouldn't be promoting that effort is. So this is only if the software you produce will be reused in some way. Sometimes you do things and you throw them away, and that's fine. And that's in the process of the work we do. So
it's a really good point. I feel like a lot of these comments are very good suggestions for the next time we run a workshop. So I would take note of those. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. I will pass back to Morane for next steps and wrapping up. Thank
you, Neil, and thank you, everyone. This was a very nice activity. I feel that it's really interesting to have all subjects treated by all participants. So I'm really glad to have these notes taken, and we will publish that in some way. A good point. If you want to be anonymized on this type of publication, it will be in a kind of a Zotero package. That's what we imagine. So please tell us if you don't want to appear in the notes. So getting back to the next steps, right? The last part. So before I do that, maybe someone can post in the link the collaborative notes again, because with the next steps, we have some questions for you. You got used to noting in a Google Doc, so you are going to continue noting in a Google Doc. It's on the main notes where let me see which page it's now on. And the question that we do want you to answer that I'm going to go to the notes. Actually, it will be easier because then I will see what you are doing. Here it's the page. So it's which page is it? 5. I'm going to ask you to go to that page and let's go question by question. The first question is, what other initiatives should we collaborate or connect to? When we say we mean the FAIR4RS Software Working Group. And what initiatives should be contacted for consultation in your community? Because as you understood during this presentation, we'll be going to define the FAIR principle for research software, and a part of that is a full consultation on a very broad scale community. To see that all parts of the scholarly community is in agreement with these principles. So please describe the organization or initiatives that you want to be contacted or collaborated with or consulted with when having these definitions. Then the next question is, what 2021 events would be a good location for FAIR4RS Software Principles consultation? So one is who we should contact, and two is where should we be and participate in which events that could be the part of this community consultation. And the third question, which is maybe the easiest to answer, or not easiest, but it's more relevant for now, is about the materials that we can share that would be helpful for you. What types of materials will be helpful to facilitate discussions about FAIR4RS software other than the draft FAIR4RS principles? So other than the outputs that we need to produce, which kind of materials would you like us to share? And if you have ideas of things that could be helpful for discussions in your communities, that's what we're asking here on question 3. In some way, I think that the Mentimeter on the last session was more successful. You're not working on the document. I want to see answers on this document, and nobody's writing. Well, there's 2 people or 3 people. Come on,
Morane,
don't be shy.
If I can ask about the events, is
Yes.
the question here existing and already scheduled events where a session could be made, or is it actually the creation of new events where the topic will be?
I agree that's ambiguous. If you have events that are happening and you can put down, go ahead. If you want us to imagine events and you can propose, it's not a legal document, right? So we're not obligated to do that, but if you have ideas, feel free. And even if you want to put your name saying that you want to collaborate with us to make this event happen, to push for this event, that would be great. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 last minutes before I'm going back to the presentation. So please, don't want to beg, but yes, go and put things in this notes. Afterwards, we are going to review the full notes from the both sessions, and we'll see what can happen next, and it will be great steps forward to this community agreement and consultation on FAIR principles for research software. And I'm going to add a thing now that you're working on this document, is that we have at the end kind of a layback feedback. If you want to put some comments there with your name or without your name, how you wish to do, it's your well, do whatever you feel like it. If you don't want to give feedback, that's okay as well. Last session we didn't ask for feedback, but we got feedback, and today I'm not forgetting. I'm going to ask you for feedback, because I do think that we do have some other workshops, and we'll love to have your input about this one. So I've given you time. I've seen some great ideas here. I'm not going to read that, because it's accessible for you all, and we will assess that on the steering committee and on the FAIR4RS Working Group. Getting back to the presentation. So that we've done that, we're here for the FAIR4RS roadmap. So this is something particular for the Research Software Alliance, which is working now on how to make FAIR research software a reality. So first, we are waiting for the FAIR4RS software principles to be defined, but then there's some activity that should be already conceptualized to map FAIR4RS software project into a longer-term framework and guide further investment, identify potential collaborators and leads, and also identify opportunities for FAIR data initiatives. And lastly, identification of roadmap elements that are specific to research software. We have seen that for the FAIR data principles, there are many things that came up after the production of the set of principles. So the thought here is to look at the road ahead and see what will happen. And we invite you with that thought in mind to join first the FAIR4RS Software Group. And on this slide, if you go to the slide here in this link, you'll get to a link to where events that we have participated in and will participate in. On Monday, this Monday, there's the FAIR's FAIR webinar on decoding the FAIR principle for software, which is at 3 Central European time. And here is the link to the registration. I'll be happy to see you there as well. It's not the same thing that today, it's really a webinar, and it's going through the report and seeing what was done in the report, calling you to comment also the report, because it's now open for consultation. I do have a thanks to give to the steering committee of the FAIR4RS Software Working Group, which were the expertise review before publication. So they reviewed this report, and you're invited to see what's that all about. Then there's the collaboration workshop. I think that the registration is now open. Maybe Neil, you can say a few words about that.
Yeah, Collaborations Workshop is an unconference about research software, and it's run by the Software Sustainability Institute. It will be virtual, so running broadly in UK or European time on those dates. And if you've never been to an unconference before, it's something which is much more collaborative, where you have lots of sharing of ideas with other people. And one of the themes is on FAIR for research software. The other one is on equality, diversity, and inclusion in software. Excellent, thank you, Neil.
And lastly on this slide is this FAIR4RS roadmap workshop happening on the December 1st. And if you want to have some updates about the FAIR4RS software roadmap, here you get the link. I think it's a mailing list. And with that, I will thank you all for joining. I will thank also all our partners that are behind this workshop and behind us providing this workshop to you. And with that, we have 5 minutes left. If you have any comment or question, that's the time. And I'm stopping the share screen. And
I have
I'm
a
going to see
small comment / question, which is that I received, so I joined some of the groups for some of the working groups, but I never received like or maybe I missed it somehow. When are there monthly meetings where there are things discussed that are going to be put in the report, or is this not going to happen now anymore because the reports are up and running? This is something that I missed.
So
Me
actually, so there's the main working group for which we do updates, but we don't have meetings yet for the main working group. We do have the subgroups, and in the subgroups, each subgroup has decided how to do the communication. Most are using Gitter, and we have chats that are going on. And if you go to the chat now, you will see all the history of the discussion on the Gitter chat. And you have also a link to the document on which the work was done, on which you can comment, because it's an open document for all. And we have also specific mailing lists for the subgroups. I'm not sure if you subscribe to these specific mailings. Yes, you have. Do you know which subgroup did you subscribe to?
I think I subscribed to 2. I can't remember which 2 exactly. I think it was the 2 and 4, but I'm not sure.
I must say that I'm leading one of the subgroups. I've sent only one mail to the mailing list, and most of the discussion was in the Gitter and on the document. So I'm taking your remark as a remark and comment to maybe have more information on the mailing lists.
Can you share the link to the Gitter? If I'm looking at the right repository, I don't see it.
Okay, so if you're on the GitHub repository?
I am in the FAIR4RS. Is that the one, or maybe there is another one? Sorry.
No, it's that one. Normally on the main page, we had the links added. I'm not sure. Fotis, do you remember? In the GitHub, you're the GitHub master.
I'm not really sure if we have the Gitter.
So basically,
not the Gitter master. I think that's Mateusz.
So basically, the organization of the document and the contribution to the document is through Gitter, right? Everything is asynchronous. There has not been like a meeting for, we are going to sit down and discuss this.
Yeah. I guess as Morane has said, each subgroup has taken different approaches and at different timescales, partly because it's an international group. So some have used mailing lists, some have used Google Docs, some have used Gitter, most have used some combination. I guess if you want to find out the current status and where you can contribute, it's probably best to ask the lead of that working group directly just now, and they can kind of fill you in on the current status. If one of them was the subgroup 4 that you signed up for, that's my fault. Subgroup 4 only got started effectively last month, so it's sort of behind, and you have not missed your opportunity to contribute to the analysis in subgroup 4. You've only kind of like not yet filled out the survey at worst.
I think nobody has missed the opportunity, because as we saw in the updates, most of us are on way to have a finalized document, but not yet. So really, Neil's suggestion to contact the lead of the subgroup that you are interested in with a mail would be the best way to go now.
Right. Well, just to make sure that more people in my situation are aware of this, I would try to clarify this. I know that you have some links in the GitHub repository. I went through them, but maybe having like this clearly stated somewhere, because I went to the RDA group, right? And in the RDA group, it says, oh yeah, this group has been endorsed. And I was like, oh, so this has been endorsed, good to know. But I didn't know any other.
So we did have at least, and since the endorsement, we did have 3 updates, including the session in VP16 that happened last week. So I don't know if you have participated in VP16, but this is something.
I wasn't able to participate in that one, but well, that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, because I wanted to catch up.
Excellent. So you didn't miss anything. So go right ahead, and we will continue updating the mailing list the FAIR4RS software mailing list. And I'm sure that if everything is okay with your emails, you will be also updated about that.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, everyone. We got to the hour and we finished our 3-hour workshop. And I thank you all for your participation. That was a great effort and a great help for us, the steering committee, and other members to have some input from the RSC community. So thank you very much. And I wish you a good evening, a good night, or a good morning. I don't know where you are.
I would also like, from the part of SORSE, I would also like to thank everyone, all the participants and all the speakers today. So Anna-Lena, Morane, Carl was also helping with a lot with the chat, and Neil, Chue, Leyla, and Fotis as well, according to the order in my screen. So thanks a lot, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Renata.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you very
also
much.
to you for being a good host. That's very smooth. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna-Lena.
Even though it was your first time, but don't worry about that.
Yeah, please apologize any bump on the road. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for organizing.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.